Chapter 14:16, Invisible Scars. As nightmare carried him away from the graveyard of horrors, Sonny managed to regain some of his composure. By then, they were moving deeper inland, following the light of the sacred staff. Effie was supposed to be at the end of that light. As time passed, he couldn't help but think back to the hollow butterfly. The great monster must have landed on the hidden island a long time ago, but also only a few hours ago, to lay eggs. Then, it was caught in the time loop and somehow ended up with its soul destroyed. Sonny had never heard about a nightmare creature becoming hollow, but it was not impossible. The question was, how had it happened? The obvious answer was that the gargantuan creature had been attacked by someone who could destroy souls. When a soul was destroyed, the body usually died with it, but on rare occasions it survived. That was how hollow humans appeared, so the same thing could have happened to this great monster. There certainly could be a creature capable of shattering souls on this hellish island, and powerful enough to slay a great monster. In fact, Sonny did not even need to ponder long to think of one. Was an undying slaughter a perfect candidate? Killing a great monster was all but a hopeless endeavor for the members of the cohort, but to the mist wraith, it would be no different from what facing carapace centurions had been for the sleepers of the forgotten shore. Fatally dangerous, but not at all impossible. There could be more soul breakers on Windflower as well. That said, somehow Sonny did not think that that was what had happened. Not because he didn't think that undying slaughter was incapable of slaying the dark butterfly, but because he didn't think that she was capable of doing so without leaving any trace of the battle. The dark butterfly was a great monster, and as such, it possessed 2 corruption cores. That meant that the defiled wraith had to deliver at least 2 blows to its soul in order to destroy it. Would the aerial horror have remained idle while it was being killed? Not a chance. If it had been attacked, the whole place would have been turned upside down with one flip of its enormous wings. And yet there was no trace of destruction around the monstrous butterfly. The bones surrounding it were unharmed, and the ground was unbroken. All its eggs were whole. It was almost as if the great monster had simply ceased to be, peacefully, and without even noticing. The same went for the revolting larvae. How could it be? Sonny felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had no reason to make this conclusion, but he felt that he had an idea. Was it because of the time loop? Riding through the mist, Sonny gripped the guiding light tighter. The sin of solace had asked him before how many deaths Sonny would be able to endure before turning into a drooling fool. The answer was quite a lot, but there was no question that he had a limit. After spending a few years on Windflower, his mental state would inevitably deteriorate. Although his flesh was miraculously restored every time he returned to the starting point of the loop, the mental scars remained. What about spiritual scars? Sonny did not know a lot about souls, but he knew that they could be damaged. They could also be healed, and possess the ability to slowly mend themselves, just like flesh did. And just like flesh, there was a limit to how much punishment souls could withstand. So, what was going to happen to his soul after he spent a long time being killed and reborn in the loop? Would it be covered by scars and gaping wounds? Was it going to collapse eventually? Maybe it would take a year, or a few years, or a few hundred years, or a few months. When would his soul reach its limit? Sonny was unique, because he had become aware of the loop and kept his memories after returning to the past. As far as he knew, no one except him bore the mental scars of the previous revolutions. Their minds were wiped clean. But maybe their souls weren't, at least not entirely. So if the dark butterfly had landed on Windflower countless years ago, maybe even the soul of a great monster could not withstand the terrible curse of the whirlpool of time. I have to be careful. If a great monster, a creature with a soul infinitely more vast and potent than his, had been made hollow by the time loop, then Sonny would be, as well. He had never consciously relied on the nature of the repeating time, but deep down inside, Sonny was consoled by the thought that his failures would be erased, and he would get another chance. And then another and another and another. But all this time, he was most likely on a timer. Time was merciless, and even when it repeated itself, living beings were not meant to be eternal. I have to make each revolution count. Steeling himself, Sonny looked into the surrounding mist and forced himself to calm down. Right now, he needed to survive the trip into the depths of the island, find Effie, and return to the chain breaker. That was all he had to think about. There were many harrowing creatures hiding in the fog, without a doubt. But he was one of the most elusive awakened in the world. Even in the Antarctic center, when everyone had perished, Sonny managed to escape alive. He might not be able to slay Undying Slaughter, the dreadful giant wandering the mist, and the other abominations trapped on Windflower, but he would at least have a chance to run away from them. Not the most courageous statement, but who needs courage anyway? Being a coward is what keeps people alive. He vaguely remembered lecturing Master Roan on the topic. That past seemed so distant. Sonny wondered how the White Feather clan was doing. By now, Antarctica must have been completely decimated. Had Saint Tyrus and her people been able to evacuate in time, or were they gone too? Shaking his head, he threw all unnecessary thoughts away and concentrated on his surroundings. Nightmare had carried him far inland by now. They were once again in the pine forest, but did it only seem that way, or was the mist less thick here? Somewhat surprised, Sonny realized that he could see much further in the fog than he had before. The ground was also inclined, as if they were climbing a hill. The higher they climbed, and the closer to the center of Windflower they traveled, the less oppressive the mist became. And then, when they finally crested the hill, Sonny stopped Nightmare and looked up, feeling a cold shadow fall upon him. In front of him, some distance away, a tall tower rose into the sky. Its windows were dark except for one. At the very top of the tower, a single window shone with a bright, warm, welcoming light. Sonny remained motionless for a while, looking at the landscape in front of him. The tower stood on a tall black cliff, perched on top of it like a gray obelisk. There were stone steps climbing down the cliff from its ornate gate, leading to a bridge that arched across the wide moat. Surrounded by the forest from all sides, the tower was like an island in the sea of swirling white mist. The light in one of its windows was not the only peculiar thing Sonny had noticed, too. The most striking detail was the moat itself. The water in it was churning and flowing, moving endlessly in a circle. The current was powerful enough to dissuade Sonny from trying to cross it, not that he would consider doing such a thing on an island surrounded by a mysterious whirlpool of time. That made the bridge the only feasible way of getting to the tower apart from flying. The bridge, however. Sonny's expression dimmed. The bridge was littered with inhuman bones. There were a few living nightmare creatures standing on it, as well, all of them stiff and eerily motionless, as if petrified. Just one look at that scene made Sonny reluctant to go anywhere near the bridge. He did not need to anyway. The guiding light was pointing past the tower, at the vast expanse of the misty forest behind it. Effie seemed to have landed on the opposite side of the island from Jet. Still, it was not going to hurt him to observe the tower some more. It was the former citadel of the powerful seeker who had once lived on Windflower. After all, even though investigating it was not the reason why Sonny and his companions had arrived at the island, he had a sneaking suspicion that they would end up having to somehow. After staring at the tower for a while longer, Sonny noticed that there were runes carved into the base of the black cliff. They were hard to notice from a distance due to the color of the weathered rock, but he had no doubt that there was a massive enchantment of some sort surrounding the Seeker's citadel. Perhaps the bones littering the bridge ended up there because of the enchantment. Finally, Sunny looked up and focused on the single illuminated window at the top of the tower. I do wonder what is hidden there. But it was not his business, not in this revolution at least. Rather, Sunny was concerned that the nightmare creatures standing motionlessly on the bridge would regain their senses and catch his scent. Throwing a look at them, he grimaced. Corrupted tyrant, great beast of terror. The last one did not even look like something that should be able to exist on land. How had that thing reached so far inland? Sunny shook his head, reluctant to find out. He was ready to send Nightmare away when the ground quaked subtly under them. Instantly, Sunny paled. Then the familiar sound of snapping trees reached his ears, making the blood in his veins turn to ice. A split second later, both the rider and his steed disappeared, turning into shadows. Hiding in the darkness, Sunny suppressed his fear and looked in the direction from which the cracking sound had come. Frozen, he watched as a towering figure slowly appeared from the mist. Damnation! Some distance away, something giant was hunched among the trees. As Sunny watched, petrified, the terrifying giant slowly straightened and towered above the ancient pines, dwarfing them with its impossible height. The tips of the trees barely reached its waist. That thing is at least 100 meters tall. The giant was vaguely human-like in appearance. At first, Sunny had mistaken it for a beast, but then realized that the ragged fur covering its body was merely a crude cloak sewn from the vast hide of an unknown abomination. The giant seemed to be female. Her gaunt, gargantuan body was brimming with terrifying primal power. There were many bruises, deep cuts, and gaping lacerations marring her dirty skin, most seeping with rotten pus. Her long hair was matted and wild, hanging down messily to obscure her face. Rugged and wrapped in furs, the giantess seemed more bestial than human, and yet she was one, or had been once at least. Sunny felt unable to move. While he remained in place, the giantess raised one of her enormous, bruised, painfully familiar hands. In it, a grotesque creature that resembled a massive black octopus was struggling desperately, its long tentacles whipping around with enough force to turn the ancient pines into clouds of dust. A viscous, corrosive liquid streamed from them, dissolving everything it touched. However, the giantess did not seem bothered at all. The black acid rolled from her skin like water, not dealing any damage to it. A few moments later, she brought the struggling horror to her mouth and bit into it viciously, tearing away an enormous chunk of revolting flesh. The matted hair parted, revealing her bloodied, twisted face. The giantess was missing one eye, while the other burned with madness and indescribable hunger. Watching the enormous octopus being greedily devoured, Sunny finally realized how the decaying leopard had perished, and whom the hand that had killed the members of the cohort in the last revolution belonged to. His thoughts turned cold. Devouring beast. Indeed, the nebulous being that wandered the mist was none other than the devouring beast, one of the 6 plagues of the great river. Just like undying slaughter, she was also here, on Wind Flower. She was the future, defiled version of Effie. 2 of them. It made sense, really. Sunny had theorized that the mist wraith had been sent here to satiate her flaw. Why would the devouring beast be any different? Her hunger was just like Jet's need to kill living beings. Without the cities full of humans to devour, it could only lead to disaster. How could a creature that always needed to kill, and a creature that always needed to consume remain in verge? If these 2 abominable slayers were not sent somewhere where their flaws could be contained, they would have brought the city of the defiled to extinction, as well. Had they come here voluntarily? Or had the dread Lord lured and imprisoned them here once the Sibyls were defeated? In any case, the situation of the cohort did not change. Sunny stared at the harrowing giantess for a few more moments, then rushed away as fast as he could. He and Nightmare had to escape before she noticed them. I guess I did find Effie. However, that abomination was not the Effie he wanted to find. Luckily, Sonny managed to slide down the hill and escape into the mist before Devouring Beast noticed him. Still, he didn't dare to leave the embrace of shadows for a while. Effie. Effie's aspect had always been uniquely powerful, which was no surprise, considering its transcendent rank. Even on the Forgotten Shore, there had been few people more capable than her. Some, like Castor of Hanley clan, had been superior to the solitary huntress in certain facets of physical combat, but none had been as well-rounded. That was one of the reasons why Effie had survived years of hunting the Dark City abominations alone. Her aspect was all about battle and physical prowess, so Sonny was not sure that Devouring Beast even had means of destroying his intangible form. Still, it was better to be safe than sorry. His heart was cold and heavy. How do I fight something like that? Effie's dormant ability granted her a powerful and, more importantly, comprehensive physical augmentation. She was inconceivably strong, fast, enduring, resilient. Now that Sonny was a tyrant, the gap between them was not vast, but she was still superior to him in certain aspects. The same went for her awakened ability. It basically made her skin as tough as steel. Sonny, on the other hand, had his marble shell. The two could be compared, but although the shell was more versatile, it was not as stalwart in terms of pure defensive potential. Of course, he had Shadow Step instead, making him much more mobile and elusive on and outside the battlefield. He had Shadow Manifestation as well, while Effie's ascended ability was meant to empower her allies. So there was no question about who would win in a duel. No matter how much Sonny admired his boisterous friend, he knew that she stood no chance in a fight against him. With Shadow Dance, it would not even be close, much more so if his shadows were involved. But that was Effie. Devouring Beast, on the other hand, was a defiled saint. Her transformation was to become a towering giant, and that giant inherited the benefits of her other aspect abilities, as well, all of them elevated to a higher rank. The strength of a dozen men, the skin of steel. Her gargantuan figure would also be much more visible on a battlefield, making it so that entire armies would be able to see her and benefit from her ascended ability. What a monster! Sonny was already terrified at the thought of having to face the Mist Wraith in a battle. The bestial giant was, in a sense, even more harrowing. Damn it, since when do I have to fight saints on a constant basis? And how did the plagues all transcend anyway? Facing Dire Fang was supposed to be an exception, not the rule. Eventually, he decided that there was enough distance between him and the tower to return to his human form. Diving out of the shadows, Sonny leaned on the trunk of a pine tree, breathed in deeply, and then looked at the guiding light. This escape through the shadows had consumed a lot of his essence, probably because he had brought the sacred staff with him. Usually, Sonny was able to pull a certain weight of inanimate objects into Shadow Step, but perhaps because of the staff's divine nature, it had taken a lot of effort to carry it with him. To his relief, the guiding light was still pointing forward, not back to the tower. For a few moments there, Sonny had been concerned that it would lead him to Devouring Beast instead of Effie. He hesitated for a bit, then thought about the bestial giant. The radiance of the soul crystal did not change. After a moment, Sonny remembered how Cassie had described getting the sacred staff to work, and coughed in embarrassment. Come on, really? Then he concentrated and thought. Miss Guiding Light, can you guide me to Devouring Beast, please? Despite how foolish Sonny felt, the staff did not react. Its workings were really mysterious. Shaking his head, Sonny thought about Nephi's. The radiance of the soul crystal changed, pointing back to where the chain breaker was. When he thought about Effie, it returned to its previous state. Strange. Pondering the mystery of how the guiding light worked, he commanded Nightmare to emerge from the shadows, climbed into the saddle, and continued traveling through the mist. Windflower turned out to be extremely dangerous, but not as dangerous as Sunny had imagined it to be. There were many harrowing abominations trapped in its fog, certainly, but not as many as he had feared. There were 3 reasons for it. The first one was pretty obvious by now. Cassie had suggested that all nightmare creatures that had been caught by the vortex and managed to reach the island over the centuries were still here, reliving the same period of time over and over again inside the loop. She was both right and wrong. The mist was indeed hiding countless terrifying abominations. Sunny shuddered at the thought of having to fight them all. No matter how powerful, cunning, and lucky the members of the cohort were, they would inevitably die under the onslaught of these ancient horrors over and over again until the souls collapsed. But then again, not all of these creatures were still whole. Many were motionless and empty, just like the dark butterfly he had found in the bone orchard was. The circular passage of time had long turned them hollow. Of those that remained, many were already dead. While moving through the misty forest, Sunny found many areas where the trees had been broken, and bloodied remains of devoured nightmare creatures littered the ground. That was where devouring beast had passed through. In other places, Sunny found ghastly abominations laying on the ground, dead, not a single wound visible on their bodies. That was where undying slaughter had passed through. The 2 defiled had already eviscerated many of the prisoners of Windflower, making the island safer for the members of the cohort in an ironic twist of fate. Without their bloodthirst, Sunny would have never made it that far in a single revolution. He still had to flee and evade many terrible creatures, using nightmare speed to escape them. Luck was on his side. And yet, Sunny still failed to find Effie this time. At some point, a wide chasm barred the way forward. Not knowing how long it was and not wanting to prolong the journey by riding around it, Sunny reluctantly dismounted and climbed down. His hope was to reach the bottom of the chasm, walk to the other side, and return to the surface. However, a boundless swarm of monstrous black millipedes was waiting for him in the moist darkness. Much worse, the revolting vermin were somehow able to hunt him even in his intangible form. Sunny was not devoured by the tide of worm-like creatures, but he was forced to move deeper into the chasm to escape them, eventually ending up in a system of caves below the surface of the island. There he felt the approach of the night. Sunny knew that the suns were setting because the enchantment of the Crown of Twilight suddenly activated, replenishing his spent essence. I need to get back to the surface. It was easier said than done, though. The system of caves was not too vast, but he had to move with extreme caution. There was no need to thoroughly scout the caverns to know that there were indescribable horrors hiding in their darkness. Indeed, not long after, he met a creature that tested his ability to remain composed. Even then, Sunny managed to flee with his life, but not before losing several chunks of flesh and most of the skin on his left arm. He persisted. Covered in blood, tired, he and Nightmare continued searching for an exit from the caverns. Eventually, Sunny felt the approaching dawn. And before he knew it, I feel. Sunny waited for a moment, then slowly straightened. He was standing on the deck of the chain breaker, surrounded by mist. What? He was back to the start. Even though he had not died, the time still reversed and was now repeating itself. A stunned expression appeared on Sunny's face. Did I reach the end of the loop? He felt certain that he had. The loop only encompassed a single day. Looking into the swirling mist, Sunny let out a long sigh. He suddenly felt tired. Or rather, not so suddenly. Time was repeating itself inside the loop, and while his body was restored to its initial condition at the start of each revolution, mental exhaustion remained. The chain breaker had just landed on the shore of Windflower, but Sunny himself, he had already spent an entire day on highest alert, in constant tension, playing a lethal game of cat and mouse with dreadful abominations. And that was after dying miserably several times in a row. Of course he felt tired. Frowning, Sunny went about the usual routine of asking Cassie and Nephi's to wait, then riding Nightmare into the mist to find Jet. Then, he brought her back to the chain breaker and explained the nature of Windflower to the members of the cohort once again. Things were getting repetitive. If there was one constantly changing thing about the time loop, though, it was the sin of Solace. The Sword Wraith had all kinds of hateful comments to whip him with, coming up with new ones in every revolution. Sunny was almost glad to have some variety, even if it was both infuriating and hurtful. After settling the matters on the beach ship, Sunny ventured to find Effie for the second time. However, he failed again. Sunny did not even make it to the dark chasm. He was killed by undying slaughter while searching for Jet. The next time, he fell prey to a horrid creature that resembled an unholy hybrid between a centipede, a scorpion, a human, and a praying mantis. That happened soon after leaving the Bone Garden. Then he managed to reach the chasm once again. Instead of climbing down into its perilous darkness, Sunny tried to fly to the other side by turning into a crow. Halfway across, he heard a quiet rustle and something dove at him from above. The next moment, he was back on the deck of the chain breaker again. During the attempt after that, he was caught by the enormous abomination that devouring beast had consumed near the tower in one of the previous revolutions. Dissolving in the viscous acid, Sunny only managed to growl a hoarse curse. Then, his words were replaced by agonized screams. Back on the chain breaker, Sunny grabbed the railing and lowered his head. His expression was dim. This island was starting to get on his nerves. While Nephi's and Cassie were talking about the guiding light, he stood still, trying to throw the ghastly memories of his latest death out of his mind. Even though Sunny was not a stranger to pain, and even dying, it was not that easy to do. Suddenly, he was not sure that his previous boasts were substantiated. A few years of this, the sin of Solace might have been closer to the truth. Shaking his head, Sunny sighed and looked at his companions. After hesitating for a while, he still convinced them to hide and wait for his return. He was confident in his ability to bring Jet to the chain breaker at least. Sunny knew where exactly she would be at what time by now. He also knew where approximately Undying Slaughter would be. It was not too hard to time his actions correctly. I only have one day. Timing was not an issue just yet, but he would need to find the fastest and most efficient way of going through the motions of escaping Windflower eventually. For now, Sunny still needed to observe, discover, and memorize more details. But he was getting tired. If we don't manage to flee this hell soon, I'll have to start seriously considering my mental wellness. It was funny to even think about mental wellness, considering where he was and what was happening to him, but it was a serious issue. Sunny had to care for his mind. Right now, he was enduring blow after blow without giving himself time to rest and recover. Eventually, he would have to slow down and give himself a chance to catch his breath, in order to last longer before going insane. Not yet, though. Sunny found Jet and whisked her away before Undying Slaughter had a chance to catch up to her past self. Returning to the chain breaker, he gave his usual speech and departed once again in search of Effie. He reached the Bone Garden and turned inland. He avoided the horrid mantis. He gave the slip to the giant octopus-like monstrosity and even escaped from devouring beast without being noticed. Riding past the lonesome tower, he dove back into the misty forest and successfully avoided being killed by the nightmare creatures waiting for him there. Eventually, Sunny reached the chasm again. Hiding beneath a tree, he looked somberly at the mist above. He still had no idea what kind of flying horror killed him the last time he tried to cross the chasm. The creature had never attacked him in the forest, but since there was nothing to hide him while traversing the chasm by air, the risk was too great. Climbing down again was also a bad idea. The legion of black millipedes hiding at the bottom of the deep canyon was too dreadful of a foe. Knowing what to expect, Sonny might be able to escape from them. But then again, he might also be either eaten or chased into the caves. Well, they can all go to hell. Summoning Morgan's warbow, he wrapped one of his shadows around the arrow and sent it flying across the chasm. The arrow pierced the mist as fast as lightning and sank into the trunk of a tall pine tree on the other side. Actually, it cut a few of those trees down and only stopped after piercing the fourth or fifth one. The shadow glided down the trunk and reached the ground. Dismissing Nightmare, Sonny used Shadow Step and appeared on the other side of the chasm, unharmed. There, eat that, bastards. It was not the strongest creature that survived, but the most adaptable. And although Sonny was not that strong among the prisoners of Windflower, he was nothing if not resourceful. Grinning darkly, he summoned Nightmare and jumped into the saddle. Did it only seem that way, or had the radiance of the guiding light become a little brighter? Stay alive, Effie. On the far side of the island, the misty forest was less thick. The trees stood further apart from each other and were not as tall as in the other areas. The ground, however, was more rocky and uneven. It rose and fell, forming steep hills and deep ravines, not that it mattered. Usually, terrain like that would make it hard to see a potential enemy in advance, increasing the risk of walking into an ambush. But with the damned fog veiling everything around, why did it matter? Every kind of terrain was just as bad here. Sonny still commanded Nightmare to slow down, afraid to encounter another chasm and plummet down without ever having a chance to stop. Flying through a thick forest at breakneck speed was already thrilling enough, and he really didn't want to fall into a nest of monstrous millipedes due to the lack of caution. Riding the black steed through the mist, Sonny held the guiding light high and followed its shine. His breathing was heavy. Just a few minutes ago, he had fought a corrupted monster and killed it. The creature had almost sent him into the next revolution. It was not particularly strong as far as corrupted abominations went, but rather insidious. Its camouflage was good enough to make Sonny unaware of the imminent attack right, until the moment thick roots sprouted from beneath the ground, and a rotten tree that he had been riding past suddenly moved to envelop him with creaking branches. If not for Shadow Step, Sonny might have been caught, swallowed, and digested by the creature without being able to put up any resistance. Since he managed to escape its grasp, though, a short and violent clash followed. The abomination looked like a monstrous tree and was as resilient as a tree. It had no organs to destroy and no blood to spill. Even after cutting it down, Sonny had to summon the cruel sight and burn it with divine flame. Only when all the branches, the rotten trunk, and the roots of the monster had turned to ash did the spell announce a kill. Slaying that thing had been a lot of work, but Sonny was still satisfied with the result. At least he learned that there were normal nightmare creatures on Windflower. If he had to face another great abomination, his patience would have run thin. I feel like I'm not far from the edge of the island now. If so, Effie couldn't be too far away. Unless she was not on Windflower. Frowning, Sonny jumped to the ground, allowed Nightmare to turn into a shadow, and continued forward on foot. Now that he was so close, his heart was heavy. Dark thoughts creeped into his mind. What if he finds Effie, only to discover that he was too late? What if what he finds is her mangled body? Sonny was not sure that he would be able to endure something like that, at least not without something inside him breaking. Cresting another hill, he spent some time searching for a way down and then slid down the wet moss. At the foot of the hill, he used a pile of rocks to stop himself, sending a few of them flying. Then, Sonny looked up. It was then that he noticed a vague shape in the mist, and it seemed to notice him. Almost before Sonny could react, something shot in his direction with astonishing speed. Cursing, he barely dodged the flying object. It hit the slope of the hill behind him, pierced the thin layer of soil, and struck the bedrock beneath. The impact was so severe that it produced an explosive shockwave. A moment later, pieces of rock, dirt, and moss rained on him like hail. Sonny was already moving to attack, but then froze. The thing that had flown past him was now embedded deeply into stone, trembling. It was a strange-looking spear with a shaft of gray wood and a long spearhead of deep crimson color. Since its passage had torn the veil of mist, he looked forward and saw the vague figure clearly. In the next moment, his eyes widened. "Effie, what the hell? You almost killed me." She stared at him in shock, too. "Doofus, what the why-on, how are you here?" Indeed, it was ascended raised by wolves, Huntress Athena. She looked a bit more tan and wild than usual, covered in dirt and scratches, but there was no mistake. The dewy olive skin, the perfectly sculpted, lean muscles, the tall and beautiful figure, the long brown hair. Effie was not clad in her transcendent armor, instead wearing a crude garment made out of something that looked like shark skin. And there was something different about her. Gradually lowering his gaze, Sonny answered, "How else? I came on a ship." He stuttered and grew silent. His mind was momentarily blank. Huh. There was indeed something different about Effie. Her entire build was different, or rather, certain parts of it. Her already generous figure had become even more outstanding, but much more glaringly than that, her belly was round and protruding forward, so much so that she was supporting it with a hand. Just how much did she eat? Gods, that gluttonous woman. Sonny's mind was refusing to work properly. No, the reason for why Effie's belly looked so large had nothing to do with eating too much food. But it couldn't be. Suddenly, he remembered a small remark that Jet had made while describing their lives as river nomads. "Oh, and we fought plenty of nightmare creatures. Well, I did at least." He had not paid it attention before, but now it seemed strange. Why would Jet say that she was the only one who had fought a lot of abominations? Staring at Effie's round belly, Sonny finally realized why. By then, his eyes were as wide as saucers. "Effie, why are you pregnant?" She stared at him in bewilderment, then glanced down and suddenly flinched. "What? When did this happen?" Effie's voice sounded frightened and shocked. Then she gave him a mischievous glance and suddenly burst with laughter. When her bright laughter died down, Effie coughed and looked at Sonny with a sheepish smile. "Sorry, it was a joke. Why am I pregnant? Well, how do I explain? You see, Sonny, when a man and a woman love each other very much." Sonny was so dumbfounded that he found himself listening passively as Effie gave him the talk about the birds and the bees, her face absolutely straight. In the middle of it, he was suddenly shaken awake and pointed an accusing finger at her. "No, that's not, I know how this stuff works, damn it. What I mean is how, since when, who's the father?" Effie stopped talking and looked at him with a grin. Then, supporting her belly with one hand, she wobbled past him and pulled her spear out of the stone. Leaning on it, she sighed and shrugged. "I think we already ascertained how. As for since when should be since 5 months ago, somewhere around that." She patted him on the shoulder and added, "Oh, and I'm glad to see you too." Sonny froze for a few moments. 5 months. 13 had already passed since the start of the nightmare, but for Effie it had been only 2. Which meant that she had already been pregnant during their journey through the White Desert, the Battle of the Black Skull, and most of her time in Antarctica. But not all of her time in Antarctica. Suddenly, he slapped himself on the forehead. I'm such an idiot." A flood of memories surfaced in his mind. All the signs had been there. He should have noticed it much sooner. Back when the cohort traveled across the chained island, Effie had been acting strange. Her appetite had been unstable, and her choice of snacks had been odd, which would have been normal for any other person, but not for the gluttonous huntress. He had even teased her for suffering from motion sickness aboard the chain breaker. In hindsight, that sickness had nothing to do with the motions of the flying vessel at all. There were other hints, as well, like Effie hesitating for a while before refusing Beastmaster's offer to take her back to the waking world and leave the rest of the cohort behind. If Sonny had been more attentive, he would have realized that the Effie he knew would not have needed any time to think. She had lingered with the answer because she had been considering not just her fate, but also that of her unborn child. A child, just thinking this word is weird. He covered his face with a hand for a moment, then forced out a few words. Yeah, I'm glad to see you as well, of course. His mind was still in turmoil. Sonny remained silent for a few moments, then added weakly, "So, I am going to be Uncle Sonny soon." Hearing him say that, Effie grinned. Her voice was warm. "I think you mean Uncle Doofus." But her words were not. Sonny stared at her in outrage. "What Uncle Doofus? Don't you dare corrupt my precious nephew, or niece, with your nonsense." There was so much they needed to discuss, like how Jet was already safe, and how to get back to the chain breaker, the dangers of Windflower, the time loop. But Sonny was still stuck on Effie, the famed huntress raised by wolves, being with child. How had it even happened? I mean, I know how, and she's a perfectly healthy young woman, stupidly attractive too, but still. He stared at her, then suddenly frowned. "Wait, which bastard knocked you up? Do I need to beat him up?" His eyes widened again. "Wait, do I need to beat Kai up?" Effie remained silent for a few moments, then laughed. "God, Sonny, relax, Kai is not the father." Sonny did indeed relax a little. He felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment, both emotions glaringly irrational. What the hell did I want Kai to be the father? Shaking his head in bewilderment, Sonny lingered for a bit, then asked with an exhaustion, "So who is?" She smiled. "If you must know, he's just someone I got to know in Antarctica, a very nice guy from the evacuation army. We met by accident and, well, one thing led to another. You know, war, adrenaline, the exhilaration of having survived another day, the fear of impending death, all these things make one want to feel alive as possible." Effie had always been a physical person, and one that rejoiced in her physicality precisely because it had been denied to her prior to becoming a sleeper. Chained to a wheelchair, she had been a prisoner of her own body for most of her life. So, she exulted in being healthy and able ever since the spell had given her a chance. So, Sonny could see how Effie would have let passion take over in the middle of a disastrous war. Still, he shook his head. "What's his name?" She suddenly coughed. Sonny's frown deepened. "What's with that reaction?" Effie hesitated for a moment, then looked away. That I don't know." Sonny stared at her, scandalized. "Effie." His voice was full of disbelief and astonishment. She raised her hand defensively, a rare look of embarrassment appearing on her face. "Hey, it's not what you think. I know this guy very well. He is really a nice and upstanding guy. He's a local of Antarctica, but went through the campaign in the Antarctic Center with the 1st Evacuation Army. He was wounded in Falcon Scott and shipped east with the other injured soldiers during the last round of evacuations. That's how we met, actually. I was visiting one of my wounded subordinates in the hospital, and he was being discharged." Sonny felt a little relieved. At least she actually seemed to like the Basta, the guy, and he was from the 1st Evacuation Army. Sonny might have even met him. "So how come you don't know his name, then?" Effie coughed again. That's his flaw, actually. he was a sleeper back then. By now he must have already awakened. Her face suddenly fell, and after a short pause she added quietly, "Or died, I don't know." Sonny was suddenly speechless. A sleeper from the Antarctic Center, whose flaw is that his name can't be remembered. So the bastard who the father of Effie's child, was the young soldier who had been infected with the nightmare spell in Sonny's refugee convoy. So he had delivered the scoundrel to her doorstep with his own 2 hands. Sonny was happy to hear that the nameless sleeper had been evacuated from Falcon Scott and survived, actually. But at the same time, I am definitely beating him up once I'm back. Sonny was preoccupied with his own emotions, but noticing Effie's forlorn expression, he pushed them down and took a deep breath. They had entered the nightmare not long before the winter solstice, so by now the nameless sleeper was indeed either an awakened or dead. Much more likely dead, considering the state they had left Antarctica in. But that was not what she would want to hear. Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then forced out a smile. "Oh, that guy, bah, I know him. Don't worry too much, he's not that easily killed. I'm willing to bet that he's perfectly fine, even. We traveled 3,000 kilometers together after all, and I personally gave him literally hundreds of soul shards to saturate his core. One could even say that I practically raised him. Will a sleeper I raised go and die without asking my permission? No, he would be too afraid." Effie looked at him for a while. Slowly, the sad expression disappeared from her face, and a faint smile appeared on it instead. Noticing that smile, Sonny frowned. "What? I know that you're thinking about something inappropriate again. Cut it out." She shook her head and giggled. No, I was just thinking. Since you say that you raised him, it should be Grandpa Doofus then, not Uncle, right?" Sonny blinked. His expression froze. His heart skipped a beat. What Grandpa Doofus? Like hell, take it back. This evil woman. After the initial shock of their meeting subsided, Sonny and Effie slowly headed deeper inland. Sonny was retracing his steps. While Effie had never been this far into the misty forest before, most of her time on Windflower had been spent hiding from a ferocious nightmare creature that dwelled on the shore. She had ventured out in search of Jet eventually, but found Sonny instead. He was still reeling from the fact that the vivacious huntress was with child, and that the father was a sleeper who had once been under his command. That was a lot to digest and come to terms with. It also changed a lot. No wonder Jet said that she was the only one who killed plenty of enemies. Effie still possessed her strength and resilience, and Sonny was still benefiting from being augmented by her ascended ability. But the huntress was in no state to fight. Her condition not only made her slower and less agile, but was also too delicate for the kind of physical strain a battle entailed. What battle? She couldn't even ride Nightmare, so they had to walk at a painfully slow pace. That's a problem. Now that Effie was with him, Sonny could not cross the chasm in the same manner he had done it the first time, which meant that they would have to go around it. Added to their already lacking speed, the chance of making it to the other side of the island before the revolution ended was low. He could not run from the nightmare creatures inhabiting the forest, either. It had been possible when Sonny was free to use Shadow Step, but the only person who could accompany him into the embrace of shadows was Nephi's. With Effie, he had to stay grounded in his tangible form. Suddenly, the misty expanse of the hellish island seemed infinitely vaster and more dreadful than before. However, Sonny kept these thoughts to himself. So, we spent a nice, relaxing month drifting downstream on the corpse of a great monster while it was being slowly devoured by a swarm of horrid abominations. Sounds ghastly, I know, but it was actually sort of peaceful. Well, anyway, in the end, I had to turn into a colossal sea serpent and kill another, even more colossal sea serpent. He turned out to be the former king of Twilight. Effie stared at him silently. But that dusk whom I had killed before turned out to be Cassie. That's right, she has been living the sweet life in a beautiful palace all that time. Talk about being lucky, huh? So we repaired the ship in fallen grace and sailed to kill a different Sybil. That one I had not killed before. She was a corrupted tyrant too, but Cassie went and finished her off in one strike. What the hell? I felt so embarrassed. It would have probably taken me at least 1.5 strikes, you know. The huntress took a deep breath. So, congratulations. Now you know that you have an evil twin from the future, and your transformation ability is to become really tall, as if you aren't tall enough already. Right, Jet's evil twin is also here and she's even less pleasant. If it wasn't for the time loop, I would have been dead because of her. Sonny paused for a few moments, then nodded. Yeah, I think that covers right about everything. Looking at Effie, he noticed that her expression was blank. He raised an eyebrow. Did I not explain about the time loop well enough? I know it's weird. The huntress slowly shook her head. No, I get it, but... Sonny, do you mean to say? Her eyes were suddenly flashed with annoyance. That I've been pregnant for more than a year. Huh. Now it was his turn to have a blank expression. The corner of Sonny's mouth twitched. Everything I said, and that's your only question. Effie shook her head furiously. No, but you don't understand. Do you think being pregnant is fun? Do you think it feels great? 9 months is already bad enough, but it has already been more than a year and I'm barely half done. She rubbed her back with an aggrieved expression and pierced him with an angry look. Sonny blinked. What are you getting angry at me for? It's not my fault. Plus, it has only technically been that long. From your perspective, those additional months do not even count. Effie opened her mouth, then closed it again. That's even worse. Then she stopped, leaned on her spear and let out a long sigh. I'm hungry. Sonny was stunned, he was perplexed. Women. Shaking his head, he summoned the covetous coffer and produced some food from it. Effie's eyes glinted when she saw fruit, bread, and cheese. Grabbing a handful of grapes, she sent them into her mouth. Oh gods, this is it. You can't imagine how sick I was of seaweed and fish meat. Well, abomination meat. Sonny watched her eat silently. It seemed that Effie's already impossible hunger had become twice as dire. Now, even though there was a lot of food stored in the coffer, it was disappearing with a frightening speed. He had summoned saint and fiend soon, after realizing that escaping the abominations was not an option anymore. So they were standing guard around them, joined by Nightmare. After a while, Sonny offered Effie the endless spring and hesitated for a few moments. Eventually, he said, It must have been hard to survive the great river like that, unable to fight or even protect yourself well, really. Both yourself and the child. The huntress looked at him for a few moments, then shrugged with a smile. Yeah, sure, it wasn't easy, but Jet took good care of me. He lingered for a bit. So why did you do it? Effie raised an eyebrow. Did what? Sonny's voice was somber and serious. Why did you come to the nightmare with us instead of escaping with Beastmaster? Her expression froze. Oh. Effie did not answer for a while. Then she looked down and caressed her protruding belly with a distant smile. After a few moments of silence, she said in a subdued tone, Just the world is already falling apart at the seams. So I thought in a place like that, would this kid want to also be raised by a mother who abandons her friends? And the answer was no. Looking up, she put on a fake grin and shrugged. At least that's what I reckoned. Sonny studied her face for a few moments, then looked away and nodded. Then he smiled crookedly. I see. So you challenged the third nightmare to set an example for your child. Okay, all right. Are you crazy? What kind of example is that? Effie laughed. When she answered, her voice was soft. A stupid one. In the end, They did not make it to the chain breaker in time. Sonny managed to keep Effie safe, but the revolution ended before they even reached the tower. Coming to his senses on the familiar deck, Sonny looked into the mist and exhaled slowly. A stupid example, huh? Professor Obel might have been right. Humanity needed a little stupidity to survive. Tiredly closing his eyes, he lowered his head and sighed. This is going to be a very, very long day today. I am not going to die. Sitting on the white sand, Sonny was staring at the crude map drawn in front of him. On it was Windflower, everything he had learned about the Misty Island at least. The hidden bay where the chain breaker had crashed served as the southernmost point. To its east were the Bone Orchard and the Hollow Butterfly. To its west were the hunting grounds of the Rotting Leopard. Undying Slaughter was straight ahead, to the north, and behind her was the Seeker's Tower. There were many more marks in the sand, of course. Sonny had marked the location of every nightmare creature he knew of, and there were plenty, many of whom had killed him at least once, as well as all the landmarks he had discovered. The millipede chasm separating the far side of the island, the abandoned port where the harrowing vine terror dwelled, the overgrown shrine that was like a nightmare within a nightmare, the inescapable lake which had turned red because of the gargantuan carcass floating in it, the deathly ring of black obelisks. There were all kinds of ways to die on Windflower. He briefly wondered if there had ever been a map that cost its creator so much suffering. The worst part is that it's nearly useless. One map was not enough to help him navigate the island. The nightmare creatures populating the fog did not stay in place, making his attempts to mark their locations pointless. Devouring Beast especially had a way of appearing in the most unexpected places due to her speed. The indescribable being that hid in the mist above the island was unpredictable as well. So what he had to do was to not only map every powerful abomination imprisoned on Windflower, but also map their movements. The drawing in the sand was only the starting point. Sonny had to mentally construct dozens more, each slightly different. Only then would he get a clear picture of where the most terrible nightmare creatures were at each moment of the loop, and know how to avoid them. That, in turn, would allow Sonny to chart the fastest path to Effie and back. The problem was that tracking the abominations was not easy. If anything, it was absolutely lethal. And Sonny did not just have to find each of the horrors once. He had to find them repeatedly at different times, all the while evading the rest of the deadly creatures. He had just started on the task, but was already feeling utterly spent. The mental fatigue that had accumulated in the process of exploring the island was finally becoming unbearable. Sonny couldn't even think straight. Drawing multiple imaginary maps was out of the question. I'm tired." He rubbed his face, feeling rather strange. His body was full of vigor and energy, but his feverish mind longed for sleep. "Keep this up, and you'll really become the Mad Prince. Well, mad at least. Gods know no one in their right mind would call a hideous worm like you a prince." Sonny turned his head slightly and stared at the Sin of Solace. He was too exhausted to even get angry. "Who are you calling hideous? We look exactly the same, idiot." Shaking his head, he turned back to the map. At that point, someone's shadow fell on him. Looking up, Sonny saw Nephi's. He was startled a little. "I guess I'm really out of it." Not only had Sonny missed the movements of shadows, he had not even noticed the quiet ringing of her silver anklets. This is a map of the island. Cassie and Jet were not far behind her. In the recent few revolutions, Sonny had worked a lot on shortening the time it took to rescue Soul Reaper and bring everyone up to speed. Now, it barely took him 20 minutes. Well, his companions were still full of questions, but he could tackle them gradually. Sonny had also discarded the habit of moving alone, at least for now, and was currently trying to involve the members of the cohort in challenging the loop. He nodded. "Yeah." Picking up a stick, Sunny pointed to the southernmost mark on the map. This is where we are. Then he pointed to a mark almost all the way north. This is where Effie is. Finally, he pointed to a mark near the chain breaker and another one slightly above it. And this is where we need to go. Nephi studied the map for a few moments, deep in thought. Although she remained silent, Jet asked in a hesitant tone, "Why don't we just beeline it to that glutton?" Sunny shook his head. "I've tried many times, but it's too difficult. There are many great abominations between here and there. Even worse, undying slaughter and devouring beasts are also wandering the forest. These two, they are the most dangerous creatures on this island by far." Then he looked at the map. "But there is a cave system running below most of Windflower. If we can move underground, we might get to Effie in time. So, we are going to the nearest entrance to the caverns. There are nightmare creatures below ground too, though, so we'll make a short stop first." Jet stared at the map for a few moments, then nodded. With nothing else to discuss, they left the chain breaker behind and set out east, heading for the Bone Orchard. Sunny walked just behind Nightmare, staring into the distance with an empty expression. He felt half asleep. Nephi studied his face with a hint of concern. She hesitated for a while, then asked, "Are you all right?" Sunny flinched and looked at her in confusion. After a few moments passed in silence, he smiled. "Sure, just tired." Her brow furrowed a little. "How many of these revolutions have you been through exactly?" He scratched his head. I don't quite remember at the moment. About 30, I think. Yeah, somewhere around that." Sunny inhaled deeply, then slowly exhaled. "I guess we've been inside this nightmare for 5 months now. Well, 14 months disregarding the time storm. Time flies." Neff's frown deepened. She stared at him for a while, then looked away. "Technically, it flows." While he was considering if that had been a joke, she lingered, and then added in her usual even tone, "Maybe it's time to take a break. Aren't you treating yourself too ruthlessly?" Sunny raised an eyebrow, surprised. Nephi's was someone he would have never expected to say something like that. Wasn't she a person who treated herself most ruthlessly of all? A person who didn't mind burning alive endlessly if it meant reaching her goal? Looking ahead, he smiled. "All right, if you say so, I'll find an opportunity to rest soon." Sunny didn't add that if he was going to take a break, she would have no choice but to take a break with him. "What shall we do?" His smile widened, but then slowly grew dim. It didn't matter. She was not going to remember any of it anyway, as soon as the next revolution came. Sunny would be the only one who did. Eventually, they arrived at the Bone Orchard. The skeletal remains of the dead horrors towered above them, and the subtle sweet smell emanated by the hollow butterfly permeated the flowing fog. The members of the cohort looked around tensely, unnerved by the eerie scene. Sunny, however, had been to this sprawling graveyard many times. He walked nonchalantly between the bones, his steps hurried. "Follow me, it's right ahead." Soon, the great monster revealed itself from the mist. Even though Sunny had explained that it was not dangerous, his companions still couldn't help but grip their weapons tighter. "What the hell is that?" Jet's voice sounded hoarse. Looking back, Sunny gave her a pale smile. "Nephi's and I call these creatures dark butterflies. We've seen another one in action, much further upstream. Needless to say, it's a blessing that the one in front of us is hollow." The 4 of them stared up at the gargantuan form of the great monster in apprehension. After a few moments of silence, Nephi's finally asked, "So why are we here exactly?" Sunny lingered for a few moments. "Since it's hollow, we won't earn anything by killing it, no soul shards, no memories. But its body is perfectly healthy, and it's a body of supreme quality, so we are here to butcher it." White sparks ignited in Neff's eyes. "You want to craft weapons out of its chitin?" He nodded with a tired smile. Yes, a few pikes, I hope. If we succeed, the pikes won't have any enchantments, but they'll still be akin to supreme weapons. That should be of some help on this damned island. Sunny stared at the motionless butterfly silently, then sighed. Let's get to work, shall we? The idea to repurpose the body parts of the helpless great monster was not that deranged, provided that one was capable of rending its impregnable carapace. Sunny was by no means a master artisan, but knew more about blacksmithing and crafting than an average awakened did, mostly due to the brilliant Emporium. He was almost certain that they would be able to achieve success, even though it was going to take some time. But wasting some time here was also part of his plan. Neff had yet to replenish enough essence to use her dormant ability, which meant that Jet's wounds were still unhealed. Sunny did not want to enter the caverns before both of those things had happened. So they camped in the middle of the bone orchard for a while. Luckily, this place was one of the safest on Windflower, perhaps because the hollow butterfly's scent scared the other nightmare creatures away. Nephi's and Jet simply rested and observed, while Sunny, Cassie, Saint, and Fiend were hard at work. Their target were the 6 legs of the great monster. Severing them was no easy task, but with the help of the 5 shadows and the augmentation of the Crown of Dawn, as well as a scattering of useful utility memories, the work progressed at a steady pace. Saint and Fiend, with their transcendent strength, were of great help as well. By the time Nephi's had finally regained enough essence to heal Jet, the lower parts of the hollow butterfly's legs were laid out on the ground in front of them. They were still too large to be used as pikes, each at least 10 meters in length, so Sunny had to splinter and shave them down some more. Now that Neff could use her augmenting ability, everything went much faster. Eventually, there were 6 makeshift pikes in front of them, each crafted from chitin of supreme quality. There was also a bundle of crude javelins and a pile of long splinters to its side. Looking at the collections of weapons, Sunny couldn't help but remember the siege souvenir, a javelin he had crafted from the remains of a corrupted abomination, then enchanted and used to kill a fallen titan. Sadly, there was no time for him to enchant the ones in a similar manner. One day was too short to create any kind of meaningful spellweave. Remembering the siege souvenir also reminded him of his battle with the ravenous fiend. The vengeful creature had used a crude sword fashioned from the tusk of an unknown nightmare creature back then. After thinking for a few moments, Sunny picked up a slightly curved splinter of the hollow butterfly's chitin. Its edge was sharp enough to serve as a sword, so he tossed it to Fiend. He also handed another piece of black chitin, this one flat and roughly circular, to Saint. Sunny had personally made it into a shield before. I think we are ready. As ready as they would be, at least in this revolution. Each member of the cohort, as well as Saint and Fiend, picked up one of the pikes. The javelins were divided between Sunny, Nephi's, and Jet. Armed to the teeth, they threw one last glance at the motionless butterfly, which was now laying messily on the ground, serene despite being mutilated and deeply disturbing for that reason, and backed away. Sunny led the group through the labyrinth of bones, stopping from time to ascertain their location. Eventually, they had to climb over the spine of an especially large horror and found a small space hidden behind it. There the ground had been broken by a titanic blow, and a black pit waited for them, full of darkness. That's our way down. It was one of the entrances to the system of underground caverns that Sunny had found. Using Neff's golden rope, the Everett wine, which had once been earned by Cassie in her first nightmare, they cautiously descended into the pit. Soon, the members of the cohort found themselves standing on the rough rock floor of a natural cave, surrounded by darkness. Almost no light reached this deep down, swallowed by the mist above. However, none of them felt too concerned about it. In fact, They even felt relieved for finally having escaped the ever-present fog. There was none of it underground. Sonny had not mapped all the caves yet, but he knew the general location of where they had to go. Carrying the long pike, he took a step into the darkness and sighed. I hope we won't die here today again. No, I know we won't. The caverns were a corrupted terror's territory. A corrupted terror. It had not been that long ago that Sonny would have shuddered from a mere thought of fighting a creature like that. He was still apprehensive, of course, but not nearly as much as a wise person would have been. An abomination of that rank and class was not something a lone master should have the ambition to kill, or a cohort of them, really. Sybil of the Fallen Grace, for example, had not only wiped out the entirety of Low 49 and the enormous battleship sent to rescue its personnel, but also almost ended the lives of Sonny, Neve, and Saint Bloodwave at Falcon Scott. A corrupted terror was a walking disaster of chilling proportions. Of course, just like all people were not the same, nightmare creatures weren't either. One terror could be much more dreadful than another, even within the boundaries of a same rank. How one's aspect countered the creature's powers, or was countered instead, also played a large role. Sybil of the Fallen Grace, for example, had been a harrowing being even among terrors. She had also possessed an especially insidious kind of power, the power to twist minds and subjugate living beings. The creature hiding in the caverns of Windflower was entirely different. This terror did not possess powers that allowed it to play with its prey's mind. Neither could it destroy the prey's soul. Instead, it was viciously strong and covered by nearly impervious armor. Or maybe it was not nearly, but absolutely impervious. At least Sonny had not been able to break it yet. As for powers, he wasn't sure, but it seemed like the incredible toughness of the creature's hide was a part of them. Sonny also suspected that the very existence of the underground caverns had something to do with the terror. If not for the fact that time on Windflower only encompassed a single day, who knew, perhaps, in the near future, the whole forest would have been swallowed by the growing chasm beneath it. He could also imagine entire cities turning into ruin as they collapsed into the maw of devouring earthly continents, perhaps, given enough time. However, Sonny was not too tense about clashing with the cavern terror. There were two reasons why he felt hopeful about the upcoming battle. Firstly, the creature was clearly out of its element. Not only was it trapped on an island and surrounded by water, with no time to let its dreadful influence spread, but it was also without an army of minions. Things would have been much more dreary if the system of caves was flooded with hundreds, or even thousands, of lesser abominations with similarly tough bodies. The second reason was Jet. Her ability to ignore all forms of physical defense directly countered the most threatening trait of the powerful terror. As long as they lived long enough for her to deliver several strikes, they would win. The long pikes were meant to buy them that time. As the cohort moved deeper into the caverns, Sonny explained all these points to his companions. Nephi's nodded, expressing her approval of the plan. It would be wise not to kill it too quickly, though. He looked at her in surprise. Why? She silently pointed to Cassie. Cassie needs a little time to gain knowledge of its attributes and powers. Even if we kill this terror now, we'll still have to face it again in the future revolutions. Her insights are much deeper than what any of us can learn from pure observation, so, with her help, fighting this terror the next time will be easier. She paused for a moment, and then added evenly. In fact, in your place, I would have brought Cassie with me everywhere, to learn about every abomination on this island from her. Sonny stared at Nephi's for a while, then turned to Cassie. Actually, she's right. He had been dying over and over again, slowly learning more about the dreadful prisoners of Windflower with each death. Bringing Cassie along would have sped up the process dramatically, and even allowed him to learn things he would have never learned otherwise. And yet, he had not. because it meant that Cassie would die over and over again, too. And while Sonny shuddered at the thought of being cruelly killed, watching his companions die was so much worse. Watching Cassie die was especially hard, maybe because, despite the fact that the delicate blind girl had proven her strength over and over again, she was still the weakest of them. And he, deep down inside, he still saw her as someone who needed his protection. Cassie was quiet and unassuming, so it was not easy to keep her martial prowess in mind. Sonny sighed and lowered his head. I'll have to involve her regardless. My progress is too slow. At that moment, they entered another large cavern. The darkness here seemed especially deep and oppressive, barely retreating from the light of their luminous memories. He suddenly sensed the shadows, moving ominously behind the thick rock wall. Looking up sharply, Sonny lowered his pike and shouted, "Right side, prepare." In the next moment, the wall of the cavern to their right suddenly exploded, several tons of broken stone flying at them like an artillery shells. Sonny barely had time to dodge a slab of black rock when a massive shape revealed itself from the cloud of dust, already descending upon them. Curses! The terror resembled a giant, monstrous termite. Sonny could only see its massive head and an opened maw, with saw-like mandibles protruding repulsively from its edges. Its head alone was almost as wide as the entire cavern, and it was flying at them with dreadful speed. The dark chasm of the creature's maw was like a cave itself. Sonny had perished painfully inside its darkness once or twice, so he knew that there was no escape from it. His eyes glinted furiously. Not this time, damn it. But at the same time, another, exhausted part of his mind thought, so what if I die again? I'm so tired. Before the terror could swallow them all, Nephi's appeared in its way. Her pike was already pressed against the uneven floor of the cavern, supported by her foot, the sharp tip pointed at the approaching monstrosity. Her eyes were calm and full of resolve. A moment later, Saint was by her side. Sonny, Cassie, and Fiend were not far behind. Will it work? Before Sonny could even finish the thought, the terror plunged into the row of pikes. There was a deafening sound, and he felt a terrible force wrenching his arms. If not for bone weave, his bones would have probably snapped and shattered into 1,000 fragments. Sonny had already increased his weight as much as he could, turning into an immovable monolith. Still, he was thrown back. Cassie had been flung back, as well. The blind girl twisted in the air and nimbly landed on her feet. One of the pikes actually broke despite the supreme material it had been made of, forcing Fiend to stagger back with a dumbfounded expression. However, Nephi's and Saint somehow withstood the terrible impact. More importantly, the charge of the terror had been stopped, at least temporarily. The creature had only partially emerged from behind the broke wall, most of its revolting body still hidden from view. Neff's pike had become stuck between two of its mandibles, while the one held by Saint was pushed against the black, glossy membrane of its eye. And yet, there was still not even a crack on the impregnable chitin. Damn it! Even weapons crafted from supreme material were not able to break through the terror's armor, it seemed. However, most of them had not shattered from the impact, and the cohort was momentarily a safe distance away from the trembling mandibles. The pikes were doing their job. Rushing forward, Sonny put his whole weight into his own, joining Nephi's and Saint. At the same time, he called upon the shadows. Tenebrous chains rose from the floor of the cavern and fell from its ceiling, wrapping around the terror to immobilize it. The terror snapped its mandibles, trying to break the pikes. Its massive body moved, making the black chains groan. Jet! Right at that moment, a black steed leaped over their heads. Landing on the back of the giant creature, it rushed forward. Its rider had already slid out of the saddle, the long pike held in her hands disappearing into the depths of the terror's body. The abominations shuddered and let out a terrifying, ear-piercing shriek. The chains holding it down snapped, and the giant insect-like horror tried to throw Jet off its back. But at that time, Neff's eyes suddenly shone, and the soft radiance of her skin was extinguished. At the same time, her pike suddenly ignited with incandescent light. Noticing it, Sunny sent the shadow that had been augmenting her body onto the pike as well. The crude weapon finally managed to break through the enemy's armor, cracking it slightly. The damage done to the terror was not too serious, but it momentarily pinned it in place. That moment gave Jet enough time to catch the pike that Cassie had tossed into the air before Nightmare even landed on the creature's back. Soul Reaper did not waste any time, dashing forward and delivering another vicious strike. The creature shuddered once again. Visibly weakened and tormented by harrowing pain, it continued trying to resist, but it was already pointless. Staring at the terror, Sunny remembered his first meeting with undying slaughter and smiled spitefully. He knew better than anyone what the bastard was feeling right now. Kill it. Before too long, the battle was over. They actually managed to slay a corrupted terror without losing a single member of the cohort. The dreadful creature was dead. What the hell? It's so much easier when I'm not alone. Sunny winced and shook his head, perplexed by his own thoughts. What am I thinking? Of course it is, you fool. He was sitting on the floor, catching his breath. Nephi's was massaging her forearms with a small grimace. Cassie had retrieved the guiding light from the sling on her back and was now leaning on it heavily. Jet had just jumped down from the dead terror's massive carcass. There was an amused smile on her face. What would you know, I received a memory. Sunny smiled weakly. Congratulations. He had earned a few memories himself inside the loop, as well as a fair number of fragments. Sadly, none of them remained. At the start of each revolution, the fragments were erased, and the memories disappeared as if they had never existed. The world was returned to its previous state, with no exceptions. Apart from the sin of Solace, and the wear and tear accumulating on both his mind and his soul. Jet stared at the giant corpse doubtfully, and then asked, "Should we dig out the soul shards?" Sunny shook his head. No point. The carcass was too large. Retrieving the shards would take too long, and their benefits would be gone at the start of the next revolution anyway. He let out a sigh and stood up. We should continue moving. There should be no more abominations until we leave the caves, at least on the route I chose. Once we reach the chasm, though, it's going to be a little rough. There are these millipedes, you see. Nephi's, Cassie, and Jet listened to his description, their faces slowly turning a little green. Nevertheless, they followed him without voicing any objections. Getting out of the chasm had indeed turned out a little rough. Cassie had to sacrifice one of her echoes to buy them enough time, and even then, everyone ended up thoroughly wounded. The smell of blood attracted a few nightmare creatures in the forest, as well. Luckily, Sunny knew which paths to take, so the combined strength of the cohort was enough to fend them off. But they wasted too much time. It was already too late to try and return to the chain breaker by the time they reached the northern edges of the island. Walking through the mist, Sunny suddenly raised a hand, signaling the others to stop. Then he shouted, "Effie, it's me, Sunny. Don't throw your spee." In the next moment, he cursed and hurriedly dodged to the side. A gray spear flashed past him and hit Saint's shield with a loud crack. The graceful knight was pushed back several steps. Got him it every time, every damn time. Sunny raised himself from the ground and looked into the mist with a resentful expression. There, Effie stood, supporting her belly and looking at him with wide eyes. Doofus. She turned her head slightly, finally noticing the rest of her cohort. Bright joy flashed in her eyes. Jet secretly let out a sigh of profound relief. Damned glutton, I knew you'd be all right. Cassie lingered for a moment, then tilted her head slightly. Nephise, however, was frozen in place. Her eyes were strangely wide. "Effie, why are you?" The huntress looked at her in confusion, then glanced at her belly and grinned. "Oh, I guess you wouldn't know. You see, princess, when a man and a woman love each other very much." As she continued talking with a sincere expression, Neff's bewildered face slowly turned pink. Looking at her, Sunny felt delightfully vindicated. There was no point in trying to get back to the chain breaker. The cohort had spent too much time traveling to the far side of the island, and there was not enough of it left. Which was not to say that this revolution was useless. Sunny had learned how to craft weapons from the hollow butterfly. Next time, he would be able to do it faster. He had also learned how to kill the cavern terror. Next time, he would be able to kill better. The same went for the several abominations they had fought in the misty forest. Especially due to the fact that Cassie had told him more about the nature and powers of those creatures. Some of the things he had already deduced, but others were a complete revelation. Every revolution brought Sunny closer to the goal, at least. At least he hoped so. Currently, the members of the cohort were resting not far from the spot where they had found Effie. The huntress was greedily devouring the provisions from the covetous coffer, while Jet was trying to explain the nature of the time loop to her. Nephise still seemed a little dazed after learning of Effie's condition, and Cassie had silently merged into the background, like she always did. It was easy to forget that she was even here. Sunny, meanwhile, sat a little distance away, staring into the mist. Actually, it's a bit awkward. His thoughts were somber. Despite how much he tried to not let the nature of time on Windflower affect his mindset, he was still growing more and more reliant on the time loop. For him, this revolution was as good as done. They were not going to make it back in time, so there was no point in trying. Mentally, Sunny was already considering what to do next time. However, the situation was entirely different for his companions. For them, there was no next time. Even if they knew that time would repeat itself, it was not the kind of thing one could really make peace with. So, they must be feeling both strange and desperate about this sudden inaction. There's time to do something, I guess. Sunny closed his eyes tiredly. The overgrown shrine was not too far from here. So was the Blood Lake. It was not impossible to reach the obelisk ring, either. He had not thoroughly explored any of these places yet, and they could make an attempt. Of course, the reason for why Sunny had not been able to study these areas was because they were too deadly. He would make some progress if he took the cohort there, but only at the cost of their lives. Sunny had started this revolution with a promise to stay alive, so he was in no mood for dying or watching his companions die. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. Well, there's a couple safer things I've yet to try. Since Sunny was currently in the information-gathering phase of his vague plan to escape Windflower, there were plenty of options he had yet to explore. He summoned a memory. Soon, an ominous mirror encased in dark silver appeared in his hand, its surface like a pool of mercury, the mirror of truth. He had received this ascended memory of the 7th tier after accidentally slaying the fallen titan, defiled seeker of truth. The abomination had practically fallen on his head during the joint battle in East Antarctica and was killed by him out of pure luck. Its single enchantment allowed Sunny to gain one power of a being caught in the reflection of the mirror of truth for a period of time. The memory would be destroyed after that. It was not hard to realize that this one-use artifact was uniquely suited for Windflower. After all, it could be used repeatedly here, once during each revolution. It was strangely fitting, considering that the island had once belonged to one of the Seekers. Sunny had yet to use it, though. Except for undying slaughter and the devouring beast, he did not know enough about the prisoners of Windflower to do so. And catching a reflection of those two without being killed by them was no easy task. So currently, the reflection caught by the mirror of truth was that of Nephi's. She had picked up the memory once, back on the Black Island, and her visage still remained caught on the mercurial surface. Blindly trying to reflect abominable powers has been a problem before, but if I indeed involve Cassie, it can become feasible. This was a whole layer of opportunities he had to think about and explore. The enchantment of the Mirror of Truth was not limited to nightmare creatures, either. Sunny could temporarily gain the aspect abilities of the cohort members, as well, Neph's flames, Cassie's premonition, Jet's ability to destroy souls, Effie's Herculean strength. His tired mind went into a stupor from the sheer amount of intertwined possibilities. After a while, Sunny dismissed the Mirror of Truth and took a deep breath. There was another tool at his disposal that he had not used yet. The fragment of Shadow God's domain that he had received as a reward for mastering the fourth step of Shadow Dance. He had not experimented with it before due to the fear of wasting this powerful legacy relic. But now that Sunny was inside of the loop, was there a better place to learn what the domain fragment could actually do? He had been considering unleashing it for a while now. What stopped Sunny before was the desire to learn more about Windflower first, but he had already explored most of it, at least tentatively. Was there a reason to wait? Only one. He was exhausted. Sunny stared bleakly into the mist. The Mirror of Truth and the fragment of Shadow's domain. I'll try them next. But first, he really needed a break. Assessing these two tools would go much better with a fresh mind. Glancing at the members of the cohort, Sunny hesitated for a few moments, and then asked, "Do you guys want me to do anything specific once the next revolution starts?" When was the last time he had a real day off, free to do anything he wanted, or do nothing at all? Even in the periods of relative calm, Sunny had always been burdened by the need to accomplish so many things. This time, he wasn't going to bother. He was just going to rest. A hint of excitement suddenly bloomed in his ragged heart. Sunny waited for a moment, then waited some more. He was back on the deck of the chain breaker, surrounded by flowing mist. A slight tremor ran through his body. "I'm tired." He straightened slowly and stared into the fog. It was time for him to take a break, but Sunny wasn't even sure what he was supposed to do. His companions were just as useless as far as resting was concerned. None of them had given him a single good idea. Well, except for Jet. She had looked at him for a few moments, chuckled, and told him to take a good nap. Which was not a bad piece of advice. As a government officer who had always looked overworked and suffering from sleep deprivation, she would know best. That said, even though this revolution was supposed to be his day off, Sunny still had to rescue Jet. Relaxing while she was being killed by undying slaughter did not sound restful at all. He couldn't bring himself to even think about skipping this step. Glancing at Nephi's and Cassie, Sunny walked over to Nightmare and climbed into the saddle. Neph looked at him questioningly. "Sunny, what are you doing?" He couldn't be bothered to explain things properly. "Leaving, don't worry, I'll be back soon. Until then, just stay here." Leaving the two bewildered young women behind, Nightmare leaped into the mist. As the familiar scenes flew past him, Sunny summoned the Mirror of Truth and studied the reflection of Neph's on its mercurial surface. After hesitating for a few moments, he activated the searching reflection, enchantment. At the same time, he imagined a pure white flame and thought, "Soul flame." A small crack appeared on the silver mirror. Suddenly, Sunny felt very strange. It was as if his soul, which had always been still and silent, was in motion, rolling, billowing, burning. It was not painful, just unfamiliar. Soul flame ability description. Your soul burns with the purest of flames. That flame can both restore and destroy, and is both a blessing and a curse. How peculiar. Sunny had gained Neff's dormant ability. It was then that he realized an important detail: possessing something and being in control of it were two different things. He should have expected that much, though. After all, it took him some time to learn how to use his own aspect. For the rest of the way, Sunny kept trying to manifest Soul Flame. As he did, more tiny cracks appeared on the surface of the mirror of truth. Judging by the rate at which the memory deteriorated, he could borrow a dormant ability for about half a day. He suspected that an awakened one would destroy the memory in a few hours, while an ascended one would not last for more than one. A transcendent ability might shatter the mirror of truth in mere minutes, while anything greater, perhaps just a few moments, would be enough. Still, it was sort of exhilarating. Eventually, a small black flame appeared on his palm. Sunny stared at it incredulously. It's black. He had expected to see the pure white flame, just like what Nephis could summon. But it made sense. Soul Flame was just that, flame produced from one's soul. Neph's soul was pure and incandescent, while his was lightless and dark. Sunny also felt that his black flame was much weaker than hers. It was reasonable, too, although the flame of divinity and the potency of his ascended soul fueled it. He lacked Neph's lineage attribute, the fire. That attribute granted her unmatched affinity to flame and, among other things, empowered her soul. Also, Sunny lacked the innate resistance to fire it granted her. Ouch! He hurriedly dismissed the black flame when the skin on his palm started to blister. It hurt like hell. Sunny was no stranger to pain, but burning. Burning was up there with the absolute worst kinds of it. It was hard to imagine something more terrible. A deep frown contorted his face. As Nightmare dashed deeper into the misty forest, Sunny continued concentrating on his newfound ability. Eventually, he managed to summon Soul Flame again, this time channeling it into his body instead of manifesting it outside of himself. This time, it did not hurt. His skin was suddenly suffused with a strange dark radiance. Concentrating it on his hands, he watched as the blisters on his palms slowly disappeared. Sunny had just healed himself. Wow! How nice would it be to be able to mend his own wounds? He shook his head. Where did Neph get the audacity to call me a cockroach, even? If anything, she was the ultimate roach. He spent a bit more time experimenting with Soul Flame and eventually managed to get it to empower his body. Augmented both by both the dark flames and the shadows, Sunny felt dire strength coursing through his veins. It was not quite as daunting as when Nephis shared her flame with him, but almost comparable. One curious detail of this augmentation was that it did not divide itself into 5 distinct parts, akin to his 5 shadows. Instead, it was a single mass of flame which could be divided however he wished. Sunny imagined being augmented by his 5 shadows, all of the authentic Soul Flame, all of the mirrored Su Flame, Effie's ascended ability, and the crown of dawn on top of that. Wouldn't that turn him into an absolute monster? Yes, it would. Sadly, Windflower was a place where even a monster like that was close to the bottom of the food chain. It's an option worth remembering, though. At this point, Sunny could already smell Jet's blood in the air. Galloping past the familiar trees, he noticed her hunched figure and reached down. Grab my hand. Jet looked up, her face pale and pained. It took her a moment to recognize his voice, and another one to shake off her shock. Not even understanding the situation completely, she reached forward. Sunny pulled her up. This time, however, he put Jet in front of him instead of behind him. They ended up in quite an awkward pose, his hand pressed against her back and soaked in her blood. She grimaced. Sunny, you really know how to. He interrupted her. Make a girl squeal. Yeah, I know, now stay still. His bloodied hand was suddenly suffused with the dark radiance once again, and washed in that radiance, Jet's wounds slowly began to heal. It was nowhere near as fast and efficient as when Nephis healed people, but it still worked. And since Neph was currently devoid of essence, that was more than enough. A dark smile appeared on his face. That should save me a lot of time in the future. No matter how many times the future repeated itself. Soon, Nightmare landed on the deck of the chain breaker. Sunny had been a bit distracted, so he was surprised to see that Nephis was pointing her sword at him. After a short moment, she let out a sigh and sheathed it again. Right, they didn't see us approaching because of the mist, and then something fast jumped out of it and landed on the ship. After the lackluster explanation Sunny had given them, both Cassie and Nephis must have been tense and uneasy for the past half an hour. "You're back." Nephis started to talk, but then grew silent. She had finally noticed the bloodied figure sitting in front of Sunny. Jet used that moment to gingerly jump down and stretch. "Horse riding is just not for me. I miss my PTV." Cassie seemed taken aback. "A Soul Reaper, Jet." Jet nodded and smiled. "One and only." Then her expression darkened. "Well, I suppose not anymore." For a few moments, everyone was silent. Nephis and Cassie were looking between Sunny and Jet, startled. He had already dismounted and was rubbing his face, a little spaced out. "Sunny, you have already found Jet." He stared at Nephis for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I also found Effie. She's on the other side of the island, but we can't go there yet. Oh, Undying Slaughter and Devouring Beast are also here, as well as a number of great nightmare creatures. Basically, everywhere you go on this island, only death awaits." All of it was news for Cassie and Neph, and most of it was news to Jet. He paused for a moment, ignoring their somber expressions, and nodded. "All right, I'm going to sleep. Don't leave the ship." Sunny headed for the hatch to the interior of the ship, but was stopped by Nephis. "Wait, if you don't mind. How do you know all this? What happened?" The corner of his eye twitched. Windflower exists inside a closed loop of repeating time, and I have already lived through this day a few dozen times. I can remember the previous revolutions because of my cursed sword. The last time around, you told me to rest, so that's what I'm doing. I'm going to take a nap. Now, if you'll excuse me." He walked between the three frozen women and disappeared into the hatch. Finding his way to his sleeping quarters, Sunny dismissed his mantle and toppled onto his bed. His pillow had never felt so soft. "I'll take a small nap, just a few hours, and then explain everything properly." Closing his eyes, he instantly fell into the comforting embrace of sleep. The next thing Sunny knew, he was crouching on the deck of the chain breaker, just as tired as he had been before. He waited for a moment, then straightened and looked around in confusion. "What is this?" Sunny was back to the start of the loop. His expression soured. "What the hell, did I sleep through the whole day? Or had something killed him in his sleep?" Turning around, Sunny frowned and looked at Nephis. She met his gaze and said, "I'm fine, I can still put up a fight." He stared at her for a moment, then cursed and jumped into the saddle. Before Nephis or Cassie could say anything, the dark destrier had already disappeared into the mist. "I just want to sleep in peace. How hard can it be?" Sunny used the mirror of truth again, found Jet, and healed her. Returning to the chain breaker, he dismounted first and looked at his tense and startled companions in exasperation. Before they could say anything, he raised a hand and stopped them. "Yes, I found Jet. Time loops on this island, so I have already lived through these events a bunch of times. Leaving the ship is too dangerous, so please don't. I am going to sleep. I might seem crazy and rude, but it was actually you who insisted that I take a break. I'll be off then." With that, he nodded and used Shadow Step to disappear from the deck. Three confused women were left in his wake. Falling on his bed, Sunny closed his eyes and sighed. "Sleep." Then he was standing on the deck of the chain breaker again. Sonny straightened, took a deep breath and bellowed. Damnation! It took Sonny 5 more revolutions to finally feel refreshed. Each time, he rescued Jet and went directly to bed, only to find himself standing back on the misty deck not long after. At least it felt short. In truth, Sonny must have slept until the termination point of the loop each time. On the 8th revolution, finally, he came to his senses feeling, if not well, then at least not bone-tired. His mind was clear, and his thoughts flowed freely without being burdened by the weight of accumulated stress. I must have been more exhausted than I thought. His recovery speed was already supposed to be incredible thanks to the Shroud of Dusk, considering that it took him a whole week of doing pretty much nothing, but sleeping to recover. Sonny promised himself not to underestimate the strain of reliving the horrors of Windflower over and over again anymore. Luckily, he had paused before his sanity collapsed. That said, his mental state was still delicate. Giving himself enough time to sleep was one thing, but he also had to go through some kind of positive experiences to counter the destructive effect of dying repeatedly in all kinds of macabre ways. What is supposed to come after getting a good night's sleep? Staring into the mist, Sonny pondered for a while and then smiled. Actually, isn't it obvious? It was breakfast. Nodding to himself, he walked past Nephi's and Cassie and climbed into the saddle. Both of them looked at him in surprise. "Sonny, what are you doing?" He looked down at his companions and lingered for a few moments. Then he said, "I have an idea of where Jet is. I'll go fetch her really quick. Meanwhile, though, I have a strange request." Turning to Nephi's, he put on his most pleasant smile. "Neph, it might sound weird, but can you cook up something tasty while I'm gone? Go all out. Use any ingredient you need. It's rather important that you don't hold back." She simply stared at him, a hint of confusion hiding in her striking gray eyes. "I guess I can." Sonny grinned. "Great, oh, don't forget to make coffee. Wait, we don't have coffee. Tea then, the best tea we have." With that, he commanded Nightmare to leap into the mist. It was time for him to be pampered a little. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.